Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art. I'm your host, Novo Day, and today we're going to be talking about art and writing by sitting down with writer and author Douglas A. Burton. Mr. Burton is a novelist known for emphasizing heroic women in fiction. His debut historical novel, Faraway Bird, about Byzantine Empress Theodora, won multiple awards, including IBPA's Best New Voice in Fiction and Reader's Favorite Historical Personage. Burton's latest work, The Heroine's Labyrinth, introduces a new paradigm for story structure, endorsed by experts like Christopher Vogler, for example. And today we have the pleasure of sitting down with him. So guys, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Douglas A. Burton. Mr. Burton, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Novo. I really appreciate it.
And we appreciate having you today. We love talking shop with this kind of stuff. It's been a while since we've had an author on the show. But before we dig into the meat, the nit and gritty of your craft, I always like to give our listeners a little bit of a background on all our guests. So please just briefly or give us the long story, whatever you want to do, man. Tell us about yourself and, what led you to becoming a writer.
Well, I've always loved writing, but writing is, it's difficult. It takes a long time to kind of harness and focus and develop your craft. Took me a while to get there. And at some point, you start to have better command over what you're doing. And then you decide that you're going to take on the ambitious quest of writing a novel. And my first attempt was on the Byzantine Empire, and it ended in total failure. I wrote about 500 words and got lost in the woods and realized that I needed to study story structure so that I had a better idea on how to organize a story of that length. And that is a massive undertaking. Story structure always sounded a lot like math to me. So yeah. I avoided it. But the fact is, you really do need to have some kind of understanding of what you're doing in terms of organizing a narrative. My second attempt turned out to be a success, and that was Faraway Bird, about Byzantine Empress Theodora, as you said. I was very proud of it. It came out better than I had ever hoped, and the book won several awards, and I was very humbled by the entire experience.
Yeah, congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a big deal to me because I had been studying the Byzantine Empire privately, a Byzantine enthusiast for, decades. Since 1992. I remember because I was in high school and I happened to take out a library book on the Byzantine Empire.
What got you so interested there?
Well, a lot of times it was study hall. And a lot of times I just grab a random book and that looked interesting and I would flip through it, maybe broaden my horizons a little bit. But this book absolutely captivated me. It was the name of the book was Constantinople, Birth of an Empire by Harold Lamb. And, it's about the Byzantine Empire. And we've all heard of it. We know that the empire at some point, the Roman Empire split into two. And I was like, oh, this is the other half. Let me flip through this. And, it was not a book about the grandeur of Rome and the great legionnaires that were deployed across Europe. This was an empire divorced of Europe. That it was a Christianized empire, and this was a culture that after the split, it was fighting for its survival. Barbarism was closing in. The civilization itself was in total regression. The darkness of this dark age was closing in on all its borders, and all the policies that these people attempted seemed to be failing. And I was like, what is this? This is not the Roman Empire I read about in school. And I kept the book so long that, and I hate to admit this, I just said that I lost it and paid the fee for the book.
Your secret's safe with us. Don't worry.
Yeah. Don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody about this. Yeah.
Right? So I literally have the book to this day, and the library card is still in it, and it was stamped in 1992. And since then, my private library of books that I've purchased, even very obscure Byzantine books, I have quite a collection now. And I was able to finally use all of this to put it all together to write that novel for Empress Theodora. And since the Byzantine Empire is so little known, it was a personal thrill to introduce this culture to a lot of people who may not have known much about it.
When did you start writing?
In grade school, but at that level, it was not very good. I remember I wrote some Halloween story on notebook paper and handwritten 6th grade script. I wrote 28 pages, and it was like a big deal. And then I started trying to take it more seriously. But writing's hard.
Sure.
You can have an idea, but then you've got to articulate the idea in a way that someone can understand. And that's not as easy as you think. So, it takes decades to really master your craft and find out what you want to write about.
What year did you start writing the original Byzantine story that didn't quite, go to plan?
2008. I know because 2008, the housing market had crashed. And I lost my home in that. And,
oh my God, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm over it now. At the time, it was it was pretty stressful.
Happened to a lot of us, actually. So we can relate.
Yeah, it was. It was, and I was in Florida at the time, and it was pretty apocalyptic out there. But I sat down and I was like, you know what? Things aren't looking good economically, personally. I'm gonna do what I really wanted to do. I'm gonna write. And I grabbed a book. I think it was The Once and Future King. I just grabbed it off my shelf, flipped to the end, and I was like, okay, this is 500 pages. I don't care. I'm not going to change course. I'm just going to write 500 pages. Yeah. And that was it. Yeah. And I woke up every day, and they always say, just write every day. Not the worst advice, but that's not in and of itself going to solve everything. I wrote every day. I got to 500 pages, and none of the things I imagined for the story were taking place. Nothing had really been developed the way it needed to be. And it was essentially 500 pages of logical progression. This leads to that, which leads to that, which means this would happen next. And that did not work. And so sometime in early 2009, I began to return to my old notes on story structure and then went on a binge quest studying story structure.
So most of this, it sounds like you did kind of a self-taught program.
Well, it started there for sure. But I also realized that, sitting alone in a room and writing and reading books it isn't just going to be enough. So, you really do need to talk to and engage with other writers. I joined several writers' workshops and joined writers' critique groups and, took their feedback very seriously. And I also decided that, it doesn't, if you're just trying to be self-taught, that might be great, but there is no self-corrective mechanism beyond yourself. And that is a limitation. So I really opened myself up to reading like the Elements of Style, the Chicago Manual of Style, to learning how to use a typewriter properly so that I could type faster. And I just started to take it seriously. And after that failure of writing 500 words is when I shifted from some of the bread and butter aspects of writing to, I need to learn story structure. And that's when I really dug in on the hero's journey. I cannot tell you the hours that I sunk into that. and I mean, like, I would play a movie, and this would be the late 90s at this point. Or no. That's when I first started studying stuff. I would play a movie, and I would sit there with a notepad on my lap and take notes on how these movies were put together, based, and I was really looking for what worked and what didn't. By 2009. I grabbed all those notes again, really discovered the hero's journey at that point, and dug into that with a more serious mind.
Are you still using a typewriter, or did you shift over to?
No, I don't even know why I said that. What I meant to say it was just that I took a typewriting class in high school, and to teach you a keyboardist, like how to type. So that's why I said it that way. But really, what I meant was, instead of using 2 index fingers and dink, 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 dink on the keyboard, I tried to learn how to use it properly.
And when did you start writing Faraway Bird?
2015. I started writing it. I wrote roughly about 4 or 5 chapters. And then my second son, Lucas, was born. And it got pushed off to the side. And at some point, I sent it off to some contest where if you won the contest, an agent would talk to you.
Oh, wow.
And not only did I win the contest, the agent, I got to talk to the agent, and the agent said, young man, if you finish this book, I will represent you. We will get this published. And so, I went to my wife. I was like, man, that sounds like serious.
Yeah.
So I took this agent at their word, and I sat down and hammered out this book. And
how long did that take?
It took a while. So I got back into it around 2016, and I finished it in 2017. And at that point, I didn't know what I was doing. I tried to contact the agent, and the agent never contacted me again. I never heard. I remember her name to this day, and I'm not going to call her out.
Yeah, we don't have to embarrass.
No, not at all. But it was funny.
But she's the worst. No, I'm kidding.
She's really
Why didn't you call back, lady? God. Yeah, no.
And I nudged her a couple times. I was like, hey, I'm the guy you said. Either way, it doesn't matter because it was her vote of confidence that
helped you. Yeah, pushed you.
Pushed me over the edge. Yeah, that's right. So I still give her credit. Then finishing a manuscript is fun and all, but any writer will tell you you are just getting started. And
Amen,
so then
brother.
came the rewrites, and the book does contain some sensitive issues, some sensitive material in there. And so I was not eager to rush this out there. I wanted to have some sensitivity readers involved. I wanted to really get as much feedback as I could from as many people as I could, particularly women, to help me with my lead character. And it made a massive difference. The story changed quite a bit, and really the Theodora became so real to me in this process. And I didn't really have the book in its current form until 2019.
So tell us about your process on that note. What is your process? What do you start with?
A big part for me is having something in my head that I really want to write about. And it could be real simple. It could be I flip open a history book and I see what robes they're wearing. And I'm like, how would I describe that in words? And then if I get hooked, well, now I got to write that. I got to write it down. I got to figure out the beautiful way to put this down in words. If I have an image in my head of a moment of a character experiencing something emotional, I'm like, how would I describe that in words? You start rehearsing it in your head, and then you start writing it down on a page, and then you start building it out. And so those are two big things, like seeing what comes up from the psyche.
Yeah.
Randomly, in a sense, seeing what sticks and captivates you in terms of what would be interesting to write about. And then another major track there is music. I love soundtrack music from movies. I will listen to that, and it is amazing how often the music will evoke images in my mind that I feel like came out of nowhere. Like I didn't come up with it. It kind of auto-populated, and then that addictive moment comes in where I'm like, oh, how would I write that in my head? And so, slowly but surely, when you're tapped into a story and you're tapped into your characters, this process will lead to some really captivating moments in your chapters and then throughout the book.
Do you have a favorite soundtrack?
Oh, yeah, I've got several. Empire Strikes Back is a great one. Hook by John Williams. Last of the Mohicans is a great one. Conan the Barbarian is a great one.
So these are scores. In my head, when you said soundtrack, I thought it was like Romeo and Juliet, where they commission a series of music, like bands to make like the soundtrack. You know what I mean?
You're right. I did mean score. That is a better way to put it. The instrumental. So, yeah, those are some of the best film scores.
John Williams. We could spend an hour just on him, Doug.
Oh, he is so versatile. He's the greatest. He's the GOAT. As the kids say.
GOAT. He's still doing it too somehow at like 80 or whatever he is.
I know.
But
I heard he was going to retire.
Yeah.
I heard he wasn't going to retire. And I was like, Mr. Williams, you retire when you want to, sir.
He'll do it forever. So once you get to the next level, do you do an outline? Do you know how the story is going to be crafted from beginning, middle, end? Or are you the kind of writer that it kind of takes shape as you go?
A little bit of both. And I recommend a little bit of both because they have the whole argument about pantsers and plotters and
planners and plotters. Totally.
Right. And there's even a new one. I think they're called planters.
Yeah. Hybrids. I always recommend kind of finding a good balance between the two.
And I think that's correct. I think that that is good advice, because if you don't have any plan, you really do run the risk of spending a lot of time and commitment in your life to get lost in your own story and come up with nothing. And I think that that's why the emphasis on structure became so important. So I did have an outline, which changed a lot as the story progressed. So there were plenty of blind spots. It's one thing to envision, some plot or premise that you have. It's very different to sit down and do a single chapter with a single setting with just a handful of those characters where the rubber meets the road and start there. It's totally, totally different. So you really do have to have an outline, and then you got to let go of the outline and get into the drama of a single scene. And I toggle back and forth between both of those. And that really seems to be a successful model, at least for myself.
Especially when you get to know your characters. I think as we get to know our characters, especially as we get to the middle body, second acts, or third acts, depending on if it's a 3-act structure versus a 5-act structure.
Right.
And you say to yourself, well, they wouldn't do that. So then you have to rewrite the scene. Like when you actually get to know the characters and be like, okay, this isn't her or this isn't him, even though in your original outline, you're like, okay, well, I planned for them to do this. But then you get to know them once they kind of become real in the world of the book, that is, in the world of the narrative and the story. You suddenly are like, wait, they wouldn't do that. And then suddenly we're back to the drawing board.
100%. In fact, there's a woman that I know. She's actually one of my best friends. Her name is Lucy. And she and I had finished the Faraway Bird is a 3-part structure. And I had finished part 2, and I was already into part 3 on a small level. And she read, and she's like, Doug, would your character do this? And I was already oddly wobbly on it. I did not know how to end part 2. And when she questioned it, that was all it took. And I threw the whole thing out, and I ended up rewriting the end. And it ended up being the best part of the entire book. So, and that just underscores what you just said, really trusting whether you know the characters or not, really asking yourself, are you getting it right with this character? And then 2, the importance of feedback.
Totally.
Writers, we get the credit because we put our name on the book and we do all the, we pull the sled, but there are a lot of other people that really help us out. And I had an infinite amount of help from so many different people, and that was a big one.
Do you have an editor and or beta readers, or just the beta readers that give the feedback and then you kind of go from there, or maybe both?
A little bit of both. I had, like I said, I was very, very cautious with this book because I did not want to rush it out there, considering that it tackled some major issues and everything. So I had beta readers, I had sensitivity readers, I had people I trust and know in my inner circle reading it and giving me feedback, and then people that I had no contact with at all giving me feedback. And I went through the editing and the manuscript process multiple times, fine tuning it as I went. And the book that came out, like you said, it won awards for a reason. We took the time. I took the time, and the people who were working with me took the time to dial it in. And I felt like in the end, I brought Empress Theodora to life in that book, and when it did start winning, when the book started winning awards, I felt that was a testament, really not for just me as the writer, but to all the people that contributed, and then also to Empress Theodora herself. It was all based on the biography of her life. It's an interesting life.
So let's focus on that. So Faraway Bird. I want to for the good people that don't know, just give them a little synopsis, and then we'll kind of talk about it from there.
Sure. So Faraway Bird details the early life of Byzantine Empress Theodora. She does not become an empress in this book. It is book 1 of a 3-part series. I'm working on book 2 right now.
And this is based off of a real person for the record.
Yes, she was a real woman.
But the story is fictional around it.
It's historical fiction. It's not nonfiction. So it is a fictionalized account. It is based on the biographical details of her life. It takes place in a difficult to grasp culture, the Byzantine Empire. It's a Christianized Roman Empire, half Greek, half Roman. It was at a pivotal part of history when antiquity ended and the medieval era began. She is literally standing on the meridian of that transfer in history. So, and what made her so unique is she influenced what would be considered women's rights today. Sweeping legislation that was directly aimed at the betterment of women. She gave them legal protections in multiple areas, including criminal protection for like criminal law, where women who were arrested had rights. Totally bizarre in the 500s. We struggle with some of that even today. Back then, I can't even imagine the pushback that she must have got.
Yeah.
Because a lot of women were imprisoned and there were male wardens. There's no barrier between those male wardens and the women in prison. And she got in there and she's like, absolutely not. And she saw to it that when women who were criminals were in prison, that they had female wardens to prevent any maltreatment or sexual assault to the women there. But she did a lot more than that. But what's interesting is that in her past, she was a prostitute and the equivalent of a medieval stripper, and not just she had some acclaim.
Talk about three-dimensional character right there.
She's very three-dimensional. So she was like ill-reputed, like well-known. So she was kind of an infamous woman at this Christianized pivot point in history. And I've always wondered how did this woman, who was a poor woman from the lower classes, who somehow climbed up into the dark celebrity of medieval, sex shows and strippers, and how did she end up becoming an empress? And then two, how did she end up being the kind of woman that we would recognize today from an almost modern sense as a woman who took charge of the legal system in a way that mattered, that led to material legal changes? And why don't we know about her? So my effort was to reconcile that. And I found it by reading a book that had nothing to do with the Byzantine Empire. And this book oddly cut away. It was even odd within the book. It cut away and started discussing psychological profiles of women, exhibitionists, women, and how a lot of them had trauma in their past. And a lot of the aggressive exhibitionist behavior actually comes from something called counterphobia.
What's counterphobia?
Counterphobia is where you move towards something that terrifies you. Oh. So instead of avoiding what it scares you the most, a defense mechanism kicks in and you go right into it. You move aggressively toward it as a way to protect yourself from it. Evel Knievel is an example. Yeah. Suddenly I had this image of a woman who probably, although she was famous and notorious for this like stripper persona in her youth.
Yeah.
Well, now I saw, what if that came from something that was terrible? And what if that terrible thing is what led to all of those women's rights that she passed? So suddenly I had a three-dimensional image in my head of her, and I focus on the years from age 14 to roughly age 22, when major events were happening in her life, and she transitions from a poor girl to an exploited prostitute, to a woman who's recruited for espionage, to a woman who becomes a concubine for a governor and has access and proximity to power, to a woman who leaves all that behind and makes a big stand in her life, regardless of the cost. And it ends on a high note. And I'm writing book 2 right now.
Wow. I can see why you felt compelled to write about this woman. There's so much juicy meat here. Have you always gravitated towards writing female-led stories?
Not always. I'm a product of the 80s. I'm Gen X. Luke Skywalker, Captain Kirk, Superman, Batman, Neo from the Matrix,
Ripley from Alien. I saw that when I was doing my homework for the show. I saw that T-shirt on one of your headshots, and I was like, "Oh, is that Ripley?" I actually had to look the picture up because I had it in my head, and I was like, "That looks just like Ripley," and I thought it fed in perfectly to some of the stories you gravitate towards.
Right. So I obviously always liked a lot of male heroes, male characters.
Yeah, they're okay.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
to me, it's
We love
never
them all.
either or. You
Yeah.
know, like both heroic men and heroic women can be awesome.
But yeah, only like in the last century have we been really focusing on, the female-led stories championing women without, all of the historically apt criticisms of a lot of male writers that write female and led stories. Either we've all heard of the manic dream pixie girl or the Mary Sue.
Yep.
And I'm so glad to see someone like you being like, okay, now we have to show more respect to these women and these characters. They're three-dimensional. They're not just the most powerful creature in the universe, or they're not, just in the pixie girl example, the desire of man. Usually the author, unfortunately, is channeling that, right? So it's so refreshing to see that.
Well, and I learned a lot. So a lot of women, like beta readers and sensitivity readers, pointed out to me where.
So you got pushback, like we wouldn't say this or this wouldn't happen.
Oh, yes.
There was criticisms 100%. There.
Yeah, so they would say like, Doug, it's evident you're a male author here. And they weren't saying that. They weren't insulting me. They were saying like, your word choices here, your focus here seems like you're tipping your hand a little bit. And I took that very seriously because my goal was not to tip my hand. I don't want Doug Burton to be in this story. I want the story to elevate like itself.
Theodora
Yes. So I would always remove that. And I ended up gaining a little bit of a muscle memory on when I was doing it. So I was like, you're doing it again. So
you had like self-awareness. You could see it. You could see yourself doing it, kind of a thing.
Yes. So anyway, a lot of women helped me. And there was one time I even wrote an article and several women were pretty upset with the article. They thought it was like condescending and not.
Really?
And some women were very rude and very harsh. And then a couple were harsh, but even-handed. And I reached out to them and I'd be like, look, obviously this article didn't go over the way I wanted it to. Can you help me understand where I'm going wrong? And what had started as an adversarial exchange ended up becoming a very useful and helpful learning experience.
Is that what led to the Heroine's Labyrinth?
Was
that kind of the building blocks to that?
Right. So this whole process really helped me out as a man and as a writer. And while writing Faraway Bird, one of my biggest issues was the hero's journey fell apart. And I think I told you, I took the story structure side of writing very seriously. Yeah. And the hero's journey was my answer. And it didn't work. And I can't tell you how devastating that was to come to that realization that even after all of this, all the planning, all the effort, that it wasn't lining up. And so I started studying heroine-centric stories, not to help me write women, but to help me understand how their stories were organized. If the hero's journey criticism was that it's a little male-centric, and, which I began to understand as a writer. I was like, okay, so, we have some blind spots, we're if the hero's journey is part of that blind spot, well, then what is the heroine's journey? And I read all the books, The Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch, The Women Who Run with Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I read The Heroine's Journey by Gail Carringer, The Heroine with 1,001 Faces by Maria Tartar, and numerous others. Jane Allison's book, like there's a whole bunch of literature out there. I began to get an idea, but I never found something as useful and as concise and as clear as the hero's journey was for me. So I was like, I really need as a writer something that is straightforward. And it wasn't out there. I just did not find it. So I assembled a bunch of notes. I began watching every heroine-centric story there was. I began reading all the classic novels. I read Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, Anna Karenina, Memoirs of a Geisha is a good one. Gone with the Wind.
So the Hero's Labyrinth is almost like a writer's workshop type of book. Like it's a how-to in essence, or is it more to that?
It's not so much a how-to, because I'm not trying to tell people how to write women or female stories because it may not follow this structure. What it's really meant to do is show the archetypal designs and present them so that they could be clearly spotted, easily recognized and understood, and used and appreciated by writers or readers or viewers or anybody. That's what it's really for. If you're struggling with the hero's journey, if you're looking for something to help structure your story, then the Heroine's Labyrinth might be one of the answers for you. It was missing for me. It wasn't there. So what it is, it's a couple things. It's a presentation of archetypal designs that I have not heard articulated elsewhere. And I also show that these can be strung together, very similar to the hero's journey, in a way that forms a complete arc. And then I also wanted to stress that not every archetypal design is necessary for your story in order to complete that arc. So it is a tool for writers to use. And it's kind of a fun one to read because I use all the examples from all the best known stories in literature and film and television show that I could find. And the book has well over 200 examples in it. And that was an early count. It could be well over 250 or even 300 examples. There's a lot in there. From mythology, from the Kirkus Reviews said it best. They said from the Bible to Barbie. And I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, that is good. So what advice can you give to male writers, myself included, to craft better female three-dimensional characters?
Well, so there's the hero's journey, which most of us are pretty familiar with. And that features a departure and return from the native culture. That is a classic Joseph Campbell premise. In fact, Act 1 or Part 1, as he calls it, is departure, and Act 3 or Part 3 is return.
Yeah,
Bilbo Baggins, there and back again. Like that is the heroine's journey is different. It is an internal journey within the native culture. In so many of these examples, they tend to stay in the native culture or remain surrounded by members of the native culture, and the relationship between the heroine and the native culture creates an awful lot of conflict. And just that, just that conflict alone can sustain an entire story. There are entire novels, such as the Scarlet Letter, in which just that conflict is the primary driver of the entire story. And she doesn't go on a hero's journey. Just not. The Color Purple is another one. She doesn't go on a hero's journey. Her problems are right there, in some cases inside the household she lives in.
Can the heroine, though, just do a journey there and back again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My book, The Heroine's Labyrinth, is not gender exclusivist. I named it after the heroine because I studied heroine-centric stories. And I also felt that it was, a complement to the other model that was named after the hero's journey. However, the heroine becomes more of a structural character aspect in which there are several male-led stories that follow the heroine's labyrinth. Fight Club, Rambo, The Godfather, even The Matrix can be seen through the heroine's labyrinth lens. Or Amadeus is one of my favorites. I never figured out how that movie was structured until the heroine's labyrinth. And Mozart is structurally the heroine of that story, whereas Salieri is the villain, which I call the masked minotaur of the story.
Is it heroine or heroine? I've always heard it pronounced heroine, and I always joke that's my favorite literary drug.
Yeah.
Or is it potato?
Totally. I say heroine just because it sounds like hero, and just to make the distinction between heroin, the drug, like you just said. But I think you're right. I think it's potato.
Potato. So you mentioned that your beta readers, would say stuff like the female ones would say stuff like, "Oh, well, we wouldn't say it that way. A female wouldn't say it that way." There's a part of me that thinks like you have to write how you think they would say it or how a female would say it, stuff like that. But there's a paradigm. Let's talk about the dichotomy between how the reader reads it in their head, like the voicing, and how you actually write the voicing. How do you deal with that in your own writing style?
Well, it's a little tricky, but it's important. It's very, very important to get it to sound right. So first off, you're acting these scenes out. I shouldn't even say you're acting them out in your head. The characters are, in a sense, acting out in your imagination, and they're saying things in your mind to the other character or to the group, and so you're trying to capture that.
Yeah,
it's like you're a journalist and you're trying to write that down and be like, oh man. And then, there is a part of you that you're like, how could you say that more forcefully? And then you rewrite it. And one of the things that I've done, and I strongly recommend this to other writers, I purchased an app called Speechify. Speechify has an AI-enhanced voice that can read stuff back to you. So I will write, and then I'll upload the Word document into Speechify right after I wrote it. I'll sit there and listen. And I'll set a voice, a woman, for my book anyway, because I believe it's it's a female narrator in my mind.
Yeah,
and she'll read it back to me. And the second she says something that doesn't flow or sound right,
yeah,
I massage that line until it sounds right. And then the goal is that I can listen to the thing all the way through without having to stop and correct anything. Once I get there, I'm done with it. Then if a beta reader reads it and they pick up on something, you might have to go back and tweak again or go back to the drawing board.
Why do you, I think this is a fun thought experiment. Why do you think men have historically been so bad at this until, I wouldn't say recently. I mean, obviously there's outliers, there's examples for centuries of great female characters that men wrote. But like, obviously when things have been adapted to film and stuff like that, we're seeing these very two-dimensional, and to me, it's always like they don't respect women in real life, so it's hard to respect the character in the story.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I feel, because I've been in a lot of writers groups as well, and sometimes I'll read some writing and there's a female character in there, and you don't want to come across as like, oh, I'm the expert, because you're not. There's no guy that can claim to be the expert.
Well, it's subjective too,
It is subjective. So, but I see what you're talking about, and I see what the criticism is, and I'm like, man, she always just says sexy things. She's obviously super hot, and and there's not much
in film. I forgot you probably know the term for this. In film, we see it all the time where if there's a female character, they almost never talk to other female characters. They may only interact with male characters, and there's like a whole lists, whole database like IMDb dedicated to just figuring out when women or either the lead character actually talk to other women in the narrative. Yeah,
I read all that stuff. There's that. That's just one of many issues. Two is the word count, that the male characters have XYZ number of words in the story, and the female characters have ABC, and it's like 70 to 30 or something.
So asymmetrical.
It's very asymmetrical. Men do most of the talking in the stories, and
so what do you think the root of that is? Why has that been such an issue for so long until recently?
Well, I think a couple things. One, I think as a man, you would naturally have a male bias in the world, and I think that's natural and in some ways normal. I think in today's landscape, we're taking a second look at that and saying, does that is there any repercussions to that? Is there an improvement that can be made there? Yeah. And I can tell you from my own experience, there can, had I not taken the time to consult so many other women in writing Faraway Bird, for example, and The Heroine's Labyrinth, the book would have come out far different, and I seriously doubt it would have won a single award. I just don't think I was capable of writing her in totality alone in a room without any outside input. It just would not have happened. So but it could happen both ways too. I've seen female writers write men, and they're also two-dimensional. They can be pretty stereotypically bigoted and dumb.
Sure.
And, eye candy.
It works both ways.
It does work both ways. I do think there's more of a focus on males writing women versus
badly,
the other way around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned also that you are working on a sequel to Faraway Bird?
Yes, I'm working on that. I'm about 35 to 45% through it. And it's a very different story. She has goals now, and she's in the upper classes now, and now she is running into major social problems, being an ex-prostitute in a Christian aristocracy with visions of helping other women. There's no place for her. There's no context even for people to understand a woman like her at this point. And so, like any human being, there's going to be lots of moments of self-doubt and emotional instability when you're trying to do something and it's not working, and then doubling down and re-engaging into the goal you've set for yourself. So there's a lot more of a mystery aspect to the second book, but it will end with her as the Empress. And I do have a third book planned. The third book is the one I always dreamed of writing. It'll have one of the most incredible climaxes ever. Like, I can't wait to.
Are you going to end their trilogy, or are we going to keep going?
Well, I have the trilogy in mind. She dies at the age of 48, so she does die young.
Okay.
But the main story that I wanted to tell, not only the complete arc of each book, but the complete arc of the trilogy, should have it should deliver a punch if I'm up to the task.
And then what does the future hold for you after that? Are you going to keep writing with historical fiction? Are you going to go off-roading? Are you going to do the complete opposite? Tell us
I don't
about
know.
the future.
I have in mind to write a male-centric story about the general of this era, General Belisarius. I have an entire treatment and trilogy in mind for him as well. But right now, it's just off to the side. So that is a possibility. The Heroine's Labyrinth has really taken off in several different areas, and it's actually led to such rich discussions in certain areas. So I may even have a follow-up to that in terms of story structure, or even a second edition where I add more to it. But right now, it's about promoting the Heroine's Labyrinth and writing Theodora Book 2. Those are really my two priorities on the writing front.
And we will be on the lookout for all of that. So what is the best way to support your work? What's the best way to purchase Faraway Bird, the Heroine's Labyrinth? What's the best way to get our hands on these guys?
Well, they're both on Amazon. Faraway Bird has an audiobook, which I highly recommend. There was original music written for it and everything. Yeah, so that book is available, and that will be the first of 3 books. And then also the Heroine's Labyrinth is available now. This is the book that has just come out, and the endorsement of Christopher Vogler was kind of a big deal because there was Joseph Campbell, and he was an academic, and no one understood the hero's journey very clearly. George Lucas used it for Star Wars, and then the whole world was like, what the hell is the hero's journey? And it was Christopher Vogler who really broke it down and translated everything, made it accessible, made it understandable. And his book, The Writer's Journey, is what his gift to the world, in my opinion. And when he read The Heroine's Labyrinth, he endorsed it. And that was a huge deal to me because I had always looked up to him my whole life. And I've had a couple conversations with him on YouTube about The Heroine's Labyrinth versus The Hero's Journey. And so if you're a writer and you are looking for an alternative to The Hero's Journey, then The Heroine's Labyrinth is out there and ready for purchase right now.
Guys, check it out. And Mr. Burton, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great, man.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me talk about all this.
It's our pleasure. In fact, when the next one comes out, we need to do it again, and we can talk about the sequel. But until then, guys, check out Douglas A. Burton's work, and you can do so again on Amazon, or you can check out a lot of his links on his website. Let's spell it out for the good people. DouglasABurton.com. So that's DouglasABurton.com. Guys, check it out. Support his work. I want to thank you guys for listening. Don't forget, if you want to check out some of our stuff, you can always do so by following us at NovoDayProductions.com. You can always follow us at _Novo and _Day. Day is DE, and at AOTB podcast or aotb.podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things. You know what to do. And if you'd like to sponsor our little love child or be on the show, you can always reach out to us at novodayproductions@gmail.com for booking information. So until next time, guys, support your fellow artists. Be good to each other. And as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Created and hosted by Novo Day and the Novo Day Collective. Facebook.com/Novo Day Media, @Novo Day Media on Twitter and Instagram. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACOMusic123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Justice, JESTUS, of thejusticecompany.com. All rights reserved.